Yes, the relay on YouTube. Check it out. Lots of stories about me on there. All the boxing facts and info that you want in a very entertaining, educational manner. The relay. Check it out on YouTube.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay where we're covering today's top boxing news.
Your young charge, and she seems very focused, very confident. We know these negotiations have gone on for a while, and you know you've stood your ground, and this is now the big stage, massive opportunity, and we know you're very confident as a team.
We are very confident. You know, I wrote down a bunch of little quirky things to say and things like that, you know, on the airplane. But, you know, at this point, I really can't say that, Eddie, because, you know, I've been in women's boxing for 10 years, been managing women for 10 years, and 26 world champions I had. All right? When you see your fighter get off an airplane in tears, you know, and I know it's really lighthearted in here. I'm sorry to bring the energy down. She's not happy. She's the champion, and like you said, we were negotiating for quite some time. And she just feels as the champion that she should have a rematch clause in her contract. You know,
You that worried about losing already? I mean,
yeah. I mean, if you don't be cute.
Oh no, be cute.
You don't gotta be cute.
No, because what do you think? You're gonna win the fight or not?
I mean, she's coming to win the fight, but you don't gotta be cute, Eddie. You know what I mean? I'm not the one.
Is that?
No, I'm just saying. I'm not. Don't try to be quirky with me.
I'm not trying to be quirky. I'm saying you wanted a rematch, but we're talking about your. My question is this is a big opportunity for your fighter. You believe she's going to win the fight.
You have a rematch clause if she beats her, but not if she beats her, right? Are you worried?
No.
So why don't you put the rematch?
We're not worried. We got one.
So why don't you show some bollocks? So show some cojones. Put the rematch clause in.
I'll ask you again. Are you looking forward to the fight? Do you believe your fighter is going to win this fight?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Okay?
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, no problem.
Cheers.
Now understand something here.
I get it.
I get where Brian Cohen is coming from, I really do. As a father to a little girl myself, I can understand what that does to you psychologically to see that little girl distressed. Ah! You just want to orchestrate the best situations for her. You just want to protect her as best as you can, and seeing your child, which I think that's how Brian looks at Christina. You know, it's not just, you know, business as usual, and it's a relationship to where there isn't an emotional investment, that he does care about his fighter. He just wants to make sure that he can, you know, more or less negotiate the best situation for her. I get it.
I get it.
I don't think it's just business, and that's how you can explain the hostility. That, you know, he was pissed that Christina doesn't have a two-way rematch clause. That if anybody has a rematch clause for this fight, it's Katie. I understand the anger. I understand where it's coming from. But at the end of the day, emotional attachments aside, that doesn't mean he's in the right. It really doesn't.
Because he's not.
You gotta understand something here. There's a lot of girls out there that want a piece of Katie Taylor. A lot of them. You know, there are any variety of fights that have to happen. The Serrano fight, the Persoon rematch, what could be a mandated title defense at a green belt with Chantel Cameron. These are all things that are sitting there, waiting to happen. And giving Christina a two-way rematch clause, well, that's a bit of a non-starter.
Not happening.
Because if they were to give her that rematch clause, and she were to lose the fight in November, she'd likely activate that rematch clause. And if she does, well, that pushes all those other fights that need to happen. That would push all those other fights out several months. So a two-way rematch clause, that's just not gonna happen.
It can't happen.
You know, I get it. I understand it. But that doesn't mean that Brian Cohen is in the right. That's the thing. He's really not in the right here. I mean, I get the outrage. I know where it's coming from, and it's a parental kind of outrage. I sympathize with that, though at the end of the day, that in and of itself doesn't mean that Brian Cohen is in the right, because what Brian is losing sight of, at least it appears,
That's what it looks like.
What he's losing sight of is that, you know, it's his fighter that's being given an opportunity. But his fighter is not indispensable to Katie Taylor. If they chose to walk away from this deal, right? Hypothetically speaking, if they chose to walk away from this deal...
Who's that hurt?
Would that stop Katie Taylor from fighting for a world title at 140 pounds? Fuck no, she's got options. It just so happens that Jessica McCaskill's up there at 140. She's got 2 world titles, 2 of them. And she just so happens to want a Katie Taylor rematch. So you gotta be honest with yourself here. As much as you might love your fighter and want to look out for them, it's your fighter that's being given an opportunity. Your fighter is not indispensable to their plans. If you guys chose to walk away, they just move on to the next one. So don't kid yourself. It's you guys that are being given an opportunity. And what's worse is, you actually chose to take that opportunity. You didn't have to. Nobody's bullying Brian Cohen or Christina Linardatou in this situation. They're not. You willfully signed on for this fight. So, how do you sign on for the fight? You know what the terms are, you know what you're agreeing to, and you sign on the dotted line so that you could turn around and raise a stink about it at the press conference?
The fuck?
You know what you walked into, and you didn't have to walk into it.
It was your choice.
You know, ahead of what was supposed to be the Dillian White versus Anthony Joshua rematch, Dillian White didn't like the terms, and he would not agree to them. As a result of that, he chose to walk away. He didn't like the deal, so he didn't take the deal. He backed himself, is backing himself to go elsewhere and do other things because he didn't like that deal. Same applies to Alicia Napoleon, Lou DiBella, and Clarissa Shields. Clarissa Shields made an offer to Alicia Napoleon for a fight, but Lou DiBella felt that it wasn't enough money, not for his fighter, so they chose to walk away from the deal. Whether or not it's peanuts, depends on the dollar amount. It all depends on who you ask. But the focal point is, if you don't like the deal, if you don't like the terms,
don't accept
you don't turn around and agree to them. Don't agree to them, then turn right the fuck around and act like somebody forced you into that situation. You signed on for this. I mean, the time and the place to voice these kinds of concerns is before you sign the contract, not after, and not at the press conference for the fight. For the fight that you agreed to have under these terms. I mean, in that way, you're a day late and $1 short. If it means that much to you, you don't sign on the dotted line. You make a hard decision and choose to walk away. And given how Brian Cohen has reacted to this, how Christina Linardatou has reacted to this, that, she got off the plane, she was in tears, Given how they're reacting to the offer that they chose to accept, I'm of the opinion that, if that's how you feel about it, don't accept it. Negotiate another deal. And if you can't negotiate another deal, you know what? You stick to your guns, you back yourself, and you walk away. You build your profile enough to where you can have things your way. Now, that must be something that Brian Cohen didn't feel was feasible, because you know what? You chose to take the fight. You didn't have to. You don't have to take the fight.
Not right now.
You can say, fuck that offer, because that's a bullshit offer. We're going to do our own thing. We're going to keep doing our own thing, because I believe in my fighter enough that she can raise her profile on her own to where she can have things her way. But at this point in the juncture, if this is what you're offering, no thanks, we're good. Appreciate the offer, but, we're going to try to build our profile, because this is not in keeping with what we want for our fighter. You got to make a hard decision. You got to make a hard decision the way that Dillian White made a hard decision. You got to make a hard decision the way that Lou DiBella and Alicia Napoleon made a hard decision. Only time will tell if it was the right decision. But given what, Brian Cohen and Christina's preferences are, okay, you're not happy with the deal. Why'd you take it? You didn't have to.
You didn't.
You know what? You could have told Eddie Hearn, hey, you know what? We want to fight Katie Taylor sometime down the line, but who we really want is Jessica McCaskill. Do you realize that if this fight would have happened in a certain order, Christina would have been in a more powerful position, at least more powerful than the one that she's in right now, if things happened differently? That if Christina and Brian would have said, you know what, we do want the Taylor fight, we do want to build towards that, but who we really want
right now
is Jessica McCaskill. We want to have that fight first. Do you have any idea what beating Jessica McCaskill, potentially, I'm not saying that she would or wouldn't, I'm just hypothesizing if it would have happened that way. That if Christina would have walked in there
and won that fight
and squared off against a common opponent with Katie Taylor and took all her belts, that would make Christina not only the most dominant force at the weight, she'd be holding 3 of the 4 world titles, yeah, but she would enter that conversation, that Katie Taylor conversation, with a different air than what she's got right now. Right now, a lot of people don't know her. Now, the ones that do, they think she's a good fighter. I think she's a good fighter. I think she could be a great fighter. But better still, most people don't know her. So the demand is not there. The opponent doesn't have the profile that she would have had she fought a common opponent with Katie Taylor
first
and beat her in good fashion and took her belts. If it happened that way, who knows if it would or wouldn't. But if it did, it would certainly be a considerable profile boost for Christina. And that should have been the focus. Not jumping the gun to fight Katie Taylor, because in spite of what they're saying, they're obviously apprehensive. They're obviously having second thoughts when you're sitting here crying about a rematch clause after you done agreed to the fight. If it means that much to you that your fighter's in tears and you're pissed off, then why the fuck did you guys agree to the terms? You didn't have to. You could have said no, no, no. We don't want Katie next. We want Jessica next. If we want any fighter that you've got that or be involved in a situation that you can create, we want Jessica McCaskill first. And I actually had held out hopes that that would be the next fight we see both fighters in. I was hoping that that was the way it was going to happen, because that's more conducive towards building either of those fights with Katie Taylor. If Jessica would have beat Christina, or if Christina would have beat Jessica, one way or another, there would be more of a demand for the winner of that fight to fight Katie had they fought each other first.
That should have been the order.
But that's not what happened. These guys chose to accept this deal. Okay, well, you made your bed. Now you gotta lie in it, you know? I mean, it's a situation to where they want to have their cake and eat it too when it's not even their party. You know, this is Katie Taylor's party at the end of the day. They are controlling things. And that's just the reality of it. That's the truth. That if there's a deal on the table, if an offer is being made to you, you can either accept it or reject it. But what you can't do is accept it and then turn around and act like you were blindsided or bullied into this situation. I understand them wanting a better deal. But you know what? Who doesn't want a better deal? You know? Who doesn't? And I even understand Brian Cohen, in many ways, assuming the role of a parental figure for what is his fighter. That it's not just business. He's invested in his fighter. He cares about his fighter. I understand all of that. But at the end of the day, you didn't have to take this deal. You chose to take this deal. You walked into this situation. You weren't bullied. You weren't blindsided. So expressing this discontent post-fight
in the public eye
reads more like a child throwing his toys out of the pram than two separate parties that entered into a business agreement. Now, in welterweight news, Sean Porter had this to say. He says him and Errol Spence are the #1 and #2 welterweights. He was basically quoted as saying that he feels that him and Errol Spence are the #1 and #2 guys, and the best thing about their fight is that they're about to square off against each other. That #1 is going to fight #2, and somebody's got to get eliminated. And, you know, just given that they're about to fight, that he means to beat Errol Spence, and how he means to beat Errol Spence, that will crown him as the #1 guy at the weight. And, you know, Errol Spence expressed a similar sentiment, you know, in regards to what the fight means, that the winner of the fight will be a unified champion, that he already considers himself the #1 guy. But the fact that the winner of the fight is going to be a unified champion in possession of 2 world titles, that makes it a landslide, that whoever wins, him, Sean, they'll be #1. So what do I think about that? I mean, is this really #1 versus #2 in the welterweight division? Is that what this is?
No, it's not.
I mean, if you take a trip over there to Transnational, you know, the way they've got it, their #1 and #2 guys are Manny Pacquiao at #1 and Errol Spence at #2. You go over to BoxRec, and they've got it a different way. They've got Terrence Crawford at #1 and Errol Spence at #2. You go to Ring Magazine, they've got it a different way, yet another way. They've got it Errol Spence at #1 and Terrence Crawford at #2, and then you go over to ESPN.
What do they got?
And they've got it Errol Spence #1, Manny Pacquiao #2. And at minimum, what this communicates, at minimum, what this denotes, is that in spite of this Sean Porter-Errol Spence fight being a unification fight, and a great fight, I think it's a great fight, at minimum what it communicates, what it denotes, is that this is not a fight between the consensus #1 and #2 guys at the weight, because what you'll notice is that in spite of these 4 divisional rank standings having their differences as far as who's #1 and who's #2, in spite of them having their differences, not a single one of them ranks Sean Porter as the #1 or #2 guy at the weight. Not a single one of them. So this isn't that. This is not a fight between the consensus #1 and #2 guys. Now, will the winner of the fight, who emerges the victor, who emerges the unified champion at welterweight, will that guy be the #1 guy at the weight? Well, I'd say, okay, there you got a point. There you might have an argument, because that will be the guy in possession of the most world titles of any of the 4 champions at the weight. Well, 3, you know, once a winner of the fight is determined. You know, I'd say, yeah, the winner of the fight, that they've got the argument to be the #1 guy at the weight. But, you know, I reiterate, this is not a fight between what are the consensus #1 and #2 guys at the weight. This is not that.
No.
You know, the lineal championship, You know, the one you're always hearing about whenever Tyson Fury, whenever one of his fights rolls around? That figurative title is not on the line in this fight.
Nah.
The Ring Magazine title is not on the line in this fight.
Nah.
Most people do not consider Sean Porter, in spite of all his virtues, they don't consider him the number 1 or number 2 guy at the weight. So this is definitely not that. You know, one of the characteristics of those kinds of fights, whenever you have a consensus, number 1 and number 2 guy at the weight, you know, more often than not, those are the fights, most of the time, not always. There are always exceptions to most every generalization. However, most of the time, a fight between the number 1 and number 2 guy, usually it's perceived as being a very close fight, a 50-50 kind of fight, more or less how people view the Prograis versus Josh Taylor fight. When the fight was first announced, you know, when that fight was first announced, you know that it's official, that's what's next. Both those guys at that time, they were ranked as the consensus number 1, number 2 guys across the board, no matter where you looked. Now, that has since changed since the Ramirez and Hooker fight, but better still, you see what I'm talking about, you know? I mean, it did change because, you know, Jose Ramirez, he beat Maurice Hooker, so now some of the rank standings actually have him at number 1. Yeah, that happened in case you missed it. But before that, okay, Prograis versus Taylor. Those were the 2 consensus number 1 and number 2 guys at the weight. That's what they were, and that's why that was viewed as what could be for the lineal championship. And Ring Magazine made the announcement. They did. They made the announcement that the Ring Magazine title would be on the line for that fight. And in many ways, yeah, it's a 50-50 fight. There's a good argument on either side for either guy to take it. You look at what was the conversation in regards to Deontay Wilder and Anthony Joshua. They were viewed as the consensus number 1 and number 2 guys at the weight. Now, obviously, things have happened, things have changed, but at that time, when they were the consensus number 1 and 2, well, yeah, it was viewed as a 50-50 fight. Some people felt if Wilder lands on Joshua, Joshua's not getting up. Some people felt that Joshua not only has comparable power to Wilder, but he has the boxing skill that Wilder lacks, so he would win the fight. Good argument on either side, in all honesty. I mean, pick who the fuck you want to pick. Go with what you know, go with what you got. But you see that in that situation, once again, it's being viewed as a 50-50 fight, whereas this fight is not viewed as that. Andre Ward expressed that he views the fight as a 60-40 kind of fight, and I happen to agree. I think that Sean Porter has what it takes to test Errol Spence, to be a tougher guy than most other guys that he's fought. But rest assured that the logical choice in that situation, given what both the fighters have put forth, the logical choice to most people really is Errol Spence.
It is.
So look, I'm not bashing the fight. I think it's going to be a great fight. I think it's a good matchup. I think it's the best test Errol Spence will have faced in recent memory. But let's not kid ourselves, and let's not misrepresent this thing. This is not a fight between what are the number 1 and number 2 guys at the weight. This fight is a lot of things, but it's not that. That is what it is not.
Let's just get that fucking shit clear.